Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 137 of 2-Minute Talk Tips, the podcast that opens with a practical public speaking tip in the first 2 minutes before getting into a deeper discussion about public speaking. Today's tip comes to us from special guest, Kira Ming.
Be authentic and focus on your true story. And what I mean by that is it's one thing to kind of craft a story or a message for when you speak, but it's another thing to actually tell your story and tie it into whatever you're conveying. That's what I did when I started out speaking, and it made me a stronger speaker. It allowed people to connect with me, and it eventually led to more opportunity. It was important for me to tell my story and tie that into the message at hand. So I would say that's most important. Not just craft a story, be authentic and craft your story into, the message tied to what you're speaking about.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Kira Ming. Welcome back. Kira Ming believes strongly that you ought not limit yourself. Kira herself is a writer who fell into and then ultimately embraced public speaking. It's been the best way she knows to teach other folks to accept the possibility of greatness rather than just sort of cowering in the shadows of mediocrity. As a writer, she found that she picked up opportunities to speak, which then led to more writing, which gave her the opportunity to help others, which then gave her more opportunities to speak and gave her more opportunities to write and gave her more opportunities to help others. She didn't seek the stage, and many speakers do find themselves in that situation. Many of us get into speaking because suddenly we're called on to speak at work, to deliver a sales presentation, to pitch a project, to teach a class on our expertise, or whatever it is. We don't seek out the stage. It just sort of comes to us. And many people become speakers because they were already out there just working on their business or promoting a book, and suddenly they're asked to speak about their subject. And, well, if you're Kira Ming, you set aside your fears and you say yes to not limiting yourself. So now, let's meet Kira. So, Kira, thank you so much for joining us here on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. It's a pleasure.
I really like the path that you have taken in your speaking career in coming with that strong writing background. I've always just really enjoyed writing and creating that way, and it's nice to see how all of that stuff can come together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always am very honest about the fact that I absolutely was a writer first. I think that's kind of the core of who I am. So I try to keep that the center of what I do and how I present myself. And the writing opened so many other doors that I was kind of forced to become, a larger version of myself. And part of that, ended up being a lot of, speaking and coming outside of myself, outside of, the writing I was used to doing solely.
Right. So let's take a look at that. What was your earliest experience with speaking in front of a group or presenting in front of a group?
I'm going to go ahead and kind of use the most impactful one. It's when I knew that I would be called upon to speak more and to come outside of myself more. And that was a few years ago, about 3 or so years ago. And of course, I'd spoken before then, but the larger platform and really kind of getting into it at this higher level was around that time frame. And it was for a youth community initiative. And the mayor was present and quite a few very involved people as far as, civically and community wise. And
sort of jumping into the deep end.
Yeah, I know, right? For your first time. So I was like, oh, well, this is exciting. I absolutely was was scared, because again, I'm definitely more of a writer by nature, but I'm like, this is needed to get to my next level, and this is what I'm called to do. And so I was, on the ticket, pre-promoted. People knew I would be there. Lots of people were excited, and I was introduced, and then went up there and spoke, and kind of definitely had to own my message for the first time. And that time was actually really exciting because it kind of set the tone for kind of strengthening that speaking muscle, so to speak. And it would get easier from that point on.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things that you said in there. The idea of, once it's pre-promoted, once you're on the agenda, the advantage and the disadvantage to that is there is no backing out.
At all. Oh, at all.
So how did that talk go?
It was wonderful. You know what? I surprised myself, and I think that's kind of when I realized that literally, if you just show up for yourself, if you have a message, you'll be able to show up and deliver that message and really make an impact. And it taught me a lot about myself, because people, they don't know per se your fears or your apprehension when you get up to speak. They're more so concerned with, are you connecting with me? What is your message? Can you leave me with some value? I was able to do that. So I was very proud of myself, and it kind of created a little buzz within me to make sure I remain open to more opportunities like that. It could have, I'm appreciative. It could have went a lot worse.
Sure. Well, one of the things I think is really interesting too is when we talk about the nerves and the anxiety that goes along with that, a lot of that is generally, for most folks, at its absolute worst in leading up to the talk and maybe the first minute or two on stage. But after that first minute or two on stage, a lot of that stuff tends to drift away as you focus on your talk and your content and your message and your audience. So how did you deal with the nerves and the anxiety in approaching that event?
Absolutely. So for me, I wish someone would have told me this beforehand, because I literally had to figure it out as I was speaking.
Well, that's why we have a podcast now.
Right before I was speaking. So the nerves and, the anxiety and everything, they absolutely were present. They were present right up until I walked up onto the stage. As you were mentioning, it may happen at different points for different people, but yeah, I was nervous all the way up until the point that I was handed the microphone. And what I did, I chose, two things. The first thing, I'm really big on questions. For anyone listening, especially if you're just getting started and you're like, this absolutely horrifies me, my suggestion is to start with a question. I think it's a good icebreaker. It gets people involved. People were kind of like veering off. It brings them right back center and attention. And so that's the first thing, is I started my speech with a question. The second one was eye contact. And I know there's so many people, I've heard people say that when you speak, don't make eye contact with people. and this is a real thing. I've really heard people,
Wow.
Yeah, no, really. And
I
of
mean,
course,
there's the don't stare, but
listen, you know what I think,
yeah.
that when I've come across that, it was, I don't think these were people that were really looking to make a great impact by their speaking. You know what I mean? Because I was like, well, that doesn't sound right.
Right.
But for me, absolutely, eye contact, you get to gauge who's really paying attention to you, who's listening. And then that allows you to connect with them over and over again throughout your speech. And you definitely want to mix it up. You don't want to stare at one person the whole time.
Right.
But making eye contact with people that are really in tune with what you're saying really helps you to kind of move through with confidence.
Right. Absolutely. And one of the things I tell some speakers who just find that whole idea of making any eye contact really awkward is that one thing you can do is, instead of looking to somebody's eyes, you look to the bridge of their nose, because they still feel that eye contact connection and you're not nearly as squicked out.
Yeah, no, that's a good one too. I've heard to look at someone's forehead and
it
I've heard
helps
that
the
too.
further you
So
are
yeah,
from them. Yeah.
Whatever is easiest.
Right, right. One of the things you said a few moments ago that I think is really interesting is you talked about for speaking, a lot of it is about being a larger version of yourself. What do you mean by that?
So for me, and I can speak personally and kind of just give the context, but I've always coined myself a bit of an introvert. And so, a lot of people say that's why I make such a good writer. It's because
Hmm.
I literally live inside my head and come across very shy and timid at times, although I'm not necessarily always that way. So for me, in the beginning of really trying to cultivate, who I was, my message, where I was going professionally, the thought of speaking was absolutely horrifying. I was like, I don't want to do it. I'm not interested in being at the forefront. The story with that kind of came from initially starting my publication a decade ago and really being focused on the writing, not wanting to be seen, being behind the scenes almost 100%. But when you have something valuable and you're creating good content and you're marketing and branding to grow, your business, well, the result is that it grows and that people want to know who is behind the brand. I started being called upon to actually be seen more. And it was almost like fate, the universe, however you want to put it, was saying, yeah, you don't have a choice. You're going to come and speak. You're going to be on this panel. You're going to host this workshop and this seminar, and you're not going to stay within this bubble. And so what I mean by that, the greater or greatest version of yourself is whatever level of, and it's not minuscule because everything that we do has purpose. But if we feel like we're called to do something or we're skilled in this one area, I think that the more successful you become, the more you'll be called upon to show up in a larger way. And I think that speaking allows you to show up in probably the largest way ever because you're using your voice to connect with people and to divulge a message. And so it opens so many other doors that I really feel like you're forced to show up as your best self because now you're talking about your content and the way you present yourself, your speech, your thoughts, the value you bring, what you expect in return. It literally touches on so many different facets of your existence that even to speak just once literally demands that you show up as your best self. So that's what it was for me. And I think it's like that for a lot of people.
What I like about that is you talk about bringing your best self there, bringing your best self to your audience to be present. And that's definitely the most important aspect of that. I think the idea of that larger version of yourself too is helpful from a practical standpoint. So not only is it at the, sort of the metaphorical level of bringing everything that you have and being your absolute best to there, but also being the larger version of yourself. When you're on stage, you have to be bigger. Your gestures have to be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Your speech patterns have to be bigger and more, and there's more emphasis. So I like the idea that it really cuts across all the different aspects of speaking is to be that larger version of yourself.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I never thought about it that way, but all of that is super important because like you said, the hand gestures, there are certain hand gestures that, are kind of routine. And then people kind of come up with their own. And they really do make a difference because people use these hand gestures to engage people, to show emphasis on something, to really kind of have an energy of openness. And all of those things are important because if you're on stage and you're closed off and your posture is kind of stiff and not engaging and really inviting people into your space and into your message, it's, in my opinion, it won't be as effective. So yeah, absolutely. You literally physically will have to really challenge yourself to show up as you need to. So
Right.
absolutely. I never even thought about that. That's great.
Well, and the other aspect of that too is that a lot of new speakers, they get up on stage and they feel really awkward They feel like they're being silly when they raise their arms or move their arms out. And you get really self-conscious, but your audience doesn't notice that. You can, if you feel silly while you're going really big, you know what? You're probably getting to the point where you're at the right level.
Yeah. I think it's all about vibration and energy. And I think you're right. A lot of the things that when we're speaking, we become self-conscious about, the audience is not paying any attention to. And so it's best to not focus on those things because, 9 times out of 10, the audience is more concerned with the message and connecting with you.
And as you've been connecting with more audiences and getting more comfortable with speaking, that certainly seems like that has opened more doors for you. The more you wrote, the more opportunities you had to speak, which gave you even more opportunities to write and produce other content in sort of this virtual cycle. Could you talk a little bit about that path?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been crazy ever since making the decision to kind of say yes to not limiting myself and to enlarging my platform and my voice and my message and how I show up, which ultimately sparked with speaking, getting to that next level past writing and the content I create. It's been kind of like a snowball effect. Everyone's different, but for me, it was more open doors, obviously to speak more, to be on panels, to host workshops and seminars, and a few things happen. Number one, you've increased your audience, more people are exposed to you, and so that's a positive benefit. You're growing your following, literally. Number two, I feel like once you start to show up and speak, others want you to speak on their platform. So literally people seeing you speak makes them want to work with you in that same capacity. And also three, I've found that it's had a high conversion rate, which is very interesting because the marketing term as a product or a service for people who they know, like, and trust.
Right.
It's interesting because in my opinion, from my experience, speaking has served that exact purpose. I've had people after I've spoken, they have come up to me and wanted to work with me. They wanted a service, or they wanted to purchase my book, or they wanted to enroll in one of my boot camps or programs, simply solely based off of my speaking. And so that's very powerful. Typically, if you're talking about online, know, like, and trust looks very different than it does in person. And so I feel like in person, specifically with speaking, it's very easy for you to connect with people and for people to know, like, and trust you from one encounter. And to me, that's very powerful. And for me, it's opened up a lot of doors. So
awesome. There's something about being on that stage or being on that agenda that instantly bumps up your credibility by several levels. It bumps up your perceived level of expertise by several levels. And that's really valuable in business.
Absolutely. I think that credibility is one of the biggest things that you can invest in. Just and not always, as not just monetary, but time, effort, however you do it. I think building your credibility, especially with speaking, it just becomes a snowball effect if you utilize it properly and do your best when you're speaking.
Something else you said there that I think is really important is you mentioned saying yes to not limiting yourself. Could you talk about that a little bit and what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So for me, and not necessarily just for me, but based upon what I've seen, I know so many speakers who did not set out to be speakers. They had a journey. They started with, one thing, or they had a passion for one thing, and then they moved into speaking. They were called to speaking. They evolved into speakers. If people did not open themselves up to speaking and to showing up in that capacity, and to not limiting themselves to just simply what they do in skill and in craft, I think we'd be missing out on a lot of great speakers. We'd be missing out on a lot of inspiration, motivation, great content, lessons, education, however you want to word it. I think we'd be, missing out on a lot if people didn't choose to operate outside of their limitations, if people didn't choose to not limit themselves to just what they were doing. For me, yeah, writing is it's valuable. The ability to create with words is, what has gotten me to, this point of success. But how many more people will hear my message because I choose to speak to this audience, or, you know, be on a panel with this group of people? It really is just about not being so set in your ways and so stuck on one version of yourself, and kind of set on one platform or one channel of communicating your message, because that is ultimately limiting yourself when you think of how many people you can reach, the opportunities that can come your way, and how much you'll grow as a person from saying yes to speaking. I'm really big on, especially me, I'm the greatest case study of not saying I'm not a speaker. Because I think speaking chooses you. I don't think you choose it.
Absolutely. And that's so important, because I think so many of the times that people find their lives stuck in a rut professionally or personally, it's because they have this limited definition of who they are, and they're not willing to go beyond that. They set limits on themselves and try and just stay within those limits, instead of thinking, you know what? The only reason I have that limit is because I put it there. That means I can reach beyond it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think limiting beliefs are a real thing. And I think that if we let go of those, we would be scared of how great and how awesome we can become, and how many people we can reach, if we just stop limiting ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that basic stuff, that's often the reason it's basic, is because it is so important and so fundamental to
Absolutely.
succeeding.
Absolutely.
So, a part of your writing career, in addition to the publications and all this other stuff, is you also have written a book. And speaking about being successful in life, your book is Small Business, Big Success. So, how did you come to write this book?
After starting my publication, a decade ago, and being involved in every facet of the business, from, obviously the creation of it, the idea behind it, to the actual content, to the actual, to the marketing and branding behind it, to make sure that it grew to, as much as it could grow, which is, the purpose is to grow the brand ultimately. After doing that for so long and being effective at it, people around me would just start to kind of pick my brain, ask me how I did this, how I came up with the idea, how I implemented it, how I grew it, how do I manage it. And then a funny thing happened, is that out of nowhere, within the past few years, just this entrepreneurial spirit has just like spiked. And I feel like literally everyone has a business now. People who would have been intimidated by owning a business, or even just growing their own personal brand so that they have more opportunities. People who would have been hesitant about that are now diving into that. And so the demand for knowledge and for tips and tools and resources became more, and people kind of just turned to who they knew. And for a lot of people, I was who they knew could point them in the right direction as far as growing a business and growing a brand. And so after working with a lot of people one-on-one, it just made sense to write a book that made it really easy for the new entrepreneur or the small business owner, however you want to word it, to get clear on what it takes, get creative about how to go about it, and just show up and do it and make it happen. There's books out there that are about mindset. There's books out there that are more technical about marketing, and they'll get into, SEO and analytics and metrics. And, then there's books that are really large in their messaging, meaning they're about perhaps, monopolies or dominating a certain industry. And those things can be very intimidating to people just starting out or new entrepreneurs. And so my thought with this book was to put it into layman terms, easy, straight to the point, direct, tools, tips, resources, and, just ways to grow your business and grow your brand, even if you know nothing about business or about entrepreneurship. And it's a really cool model because it's a mix of some technical things, because you definitely need to have an understanding of certain things to successfully launch and grow a business. But I use some of my own experiences in growing a business to teach the reader how I did that. So I don't just leave you hanging and give you this tip, or give you this advice and then not show you exactly how I applied it for my own business. And so that's pretty much what the book is about: taking everything that I've learned the past decade and putting it into easy to understand terms so that anybody can pick it up, read it, and get started with their business.
So it sounds like it's sort of half memoir, half how-to guide.
I love that. I never thought of it that way. That's exactly how it is. Yes, it's a good mix. It's a good mix, and I chose to do it that way just to, make it straight to the point, but also give a little bit of myself so that people reading it can connect with my story and the fact that I wish people had told me some of the things that I put in the book and given me those tips to kind of accomplish what I've accomplished. And so I decided to just pass it along.
Awesome. So it sounds like somebody who has who is looking for tips for growing their business, or somebody who's just enjoyed listening to your delightful insights in this conversation would definitely appreciate the book.
Yeah, I think that I ultimately feel like it's for people at any level of growing their business, from just you haven't even started it yet and you're thinking about it and you want to know what this entails, or you had a business for a long time and you want to know how to get to your next level and how to look at things, what your mindset should be, or you just want to hear stories about how someone just built something there organically and on their own just because they were driven to make things happen for themselves. So I really think any and everyone can connect with my story and what I learned and how I'm conveying that to you all in the book. So I've had good feedback so far.
Awesome. So did you self-publish or go through a traditional publisher, and how did you make that choice?
Yeah, so I did the self-publish route, and it's interesting because, how do I put this? I have in my career worked for multi-million-dollar revenue generating publishing companies. Like, I worked for a traditional publisher, education publisher, and on the freelance end, I've done ghostwriting and editing for traditional publishing houses as well. And so going through that traditional publishing route would have been very easy for me because I've been in publishing for so long. And, I was a credible writer before even writing the book. But there was something about kind of just doing it my own way and taking my message into my own hands that I opted for this first one, my debut book, for it to just be done my way. It's very personal. I was very hands-on with the project, and I didn't want any outside influence. I wanted it to be my words, my formatting, my message, without any input from anyone else. And so that was important for this first project to be 100% my creative control and me managing that process from start to finish. So yeah, this one was my full, complete baby.
Well, what I think is really important there too is, as other authors and other creators look at making those decisions between self-publishing, traditional publishing, or hybrid models, a lot of folks are coming into it from having done some writing, and they think absolutely self-publishing for them. In your case, one of the reasons why you were able to self-publish effectively and produce great content is that you already had this existing background. You understood the editing process. You understood the mechanics of what goes into producing a book from your background in the publishing field. So you already had these tools that you could then bring to your own project in order to make it successful. You knew what you were doing in a way that a lot of us who just look at creating a book for the first time just don't have that same background.
Yeah, listen, I love that you brought that up. That is a really good point. That's a really good point. Let me tell you why. Because for me, because I mean, you're absolutely right. It was more so a choice for me because I had come from a publishing background and done it for so long. A book for me is really an extension of what I've done at a much larger scale. So it wasn't going to be as intimidating from me, not just from the content end because I know my message, but from, like you said, the technical end because of my experience in actual publishing. So I would just recommend, because, writing a book is also another thing that I absolutely recommend to anyone that's trying to like strengthen their brand and get to their next level. It's when we were talking about credibility before. This is another thing that really boosts your credibility, but do your research. If you know, just like you said, that you're not a publishing expert and you want for, your book to be quality, for it to be produced with quality, then I would suggest just do your research. And the good thing is that now that the industry is growing and so many people are ready to get out there and write their own books, the resources are amazing. So you can still choose to go the self-publishing route and still make sure that you're getting the professional assistance along the way. And what I mean by that is, if you decide to self-publish and you don't want to go the traditional publishing route, then you know hire an editor. Hire someone to do your formatting. Hire someone to do your illustration, your book cover, whatever you need to get assistance with. Get it so that it's right, even if you go the self-publishing route. But that would be my ultimate advice on that one, is to definitely do your research. Definitely don't let the practicality of it prevent you from, getting out there and writing that book. Because also, to tie it into speaking, becoming an author and speaking go hand in hand as well. And that's been really interesting to see how one literally plays off of the other. And what I mean by that is, I'm speaking on one panel. I'm a keynote speaker for one thing, and it's because of the book. The book opened the opportunity for more speaking engagements. And also, if you're speaking, you probably have something to write about. So I think they speaking and becoming an author both go hand in hand as well for many people, and it especially did for me.
What advice then would you have for other writers who are at the point in their careers where they need to start speaking?
My first point of advice, and the most important, would be branding. The quick version of what I mean by that is, branding is more than just a logo and your colors. I really want anyone who is thinking about the transition from writer to speaker to think about branding as a form of packaging and literally how you're showing up in the world, both online and offline, how you want to be perceived. So my first, piece of advice would be to go in and do an audit, do a social media audit. Um, Check out log into all your accounts, go to all your social media pages and make sure that they make sense. Do they all represent you properly? Are your bios strong? Do people know what you do, and what your message about, or what your content is? And package yourself accordingly. It's not just the website these days. It's depending on what industry you're in, making sure that you're on the right social media platforms and that you're syncing them and showing up in a space where people can get to know you. If people Google you or they Google your subject matter, are you going to come up and be optimized? All that stuff is important. So I'd say do some cleaning, some cleanup of your branding, and just really make sure that's strong. And then on the technical end, once you are strong and kind of confident about how you're packaged online and offline, I'd say just get started with inquiries. Really, people make it very complicated. A lot of times it's just making sure that you're connecting with people, giving value on your social media platforms, showing that you're a thought leader, that you're an expert in your field, that you're credible, and then, the opportunities kind of start to present themselves. It's almost like if you build it, they will come. Not to sound corny. I saw that in the library once. So I'm like, why do they have that up? But then it kind of like stuck with me. And I'm like, no, it's true though. If you make sure that you're showing up really strong and effectively, the opportunities start to come, and hopefully you'll say yes to them if they are a good fit for you.
I think one of the things that's really important too, when you talk about a branding and a lot of personal brands, I encounter folks online who sometimes say, ugh, I don't like personal brand. I'm not a brand. I'm a person. I'm not going to create a brand. Well, here's the thing. Everybody has a brand. A brand is just a shortcut for how other people think about you or think about your product. If you're not creating your own brand, you still have one out there, and people are still going to have their perceptions. You can choose to ignore that if you want, but you still have a brand. I think you're better off if you try and influence and control your brand than just let the rest of the world do it for you.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's funny. I snickered because this is literally my favorite topic right now, is personal branding. Those of your listeners, when you get a chance, if you Google me, Kira Ming, some of my articles will come up across one of the platforms that I contribute to. I contribute, to more than one, but this one is about personal branding. And everything that you just said is gold. And I really, 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 really wish people would understand how essential personal branding is, no matter what your industry is, and no matter, what you do. And here's why, in my opinion. Number one, this is just the age that we live in. It's the age of influence. And people will, a famous person, anybody, actress, journalist, whatever, can create a pair of socks. And they created these socks, and they're going to sell these socks. Now, these socks are made out of regular cotton, and everybody, makes these types of socks. There's nothing special about these socks. But because this influencer, or this well-known person, or this really successful person that has connected with a lot of people and has a large following and a strong brand, because they are selling these socks, the minute that the socks go on sale, 9 times out of 10 they're going to sell out. And it's not because the socks are special. It's because the person has established a brand that people know, like, and trust. I think decades ago, if you had a business, you didn't have to be seen. You didn't have to be heard. No one had to know what your business was. The world is very different now. People are more prone to follow a person who is an expert in said industry than a business that is supposed to be valuable in said industry. I think that if you can strengthen your personal brand and connect with people at the human level, you can funnel them into your product or your service a lot easier. I think personal branding is king. I even think personal branding is amazing in general, and really should be used for everyone, even if you do not own a business, or if you are looking for an actual, corporate position or a high level position within an organization. Even if you don't have this entrepreneurial spirit of building your own, empire, so to speak, personal branding is still essential. Because it still matters how you package yourself as a thought leader, as an expert, as experienced, as accomplished. If a Fortune 500 company is looking to hire somebody, at a high level, and there's you who chose not to really develop a personal brand, and then there's someone else who did, and you guys are going for the same position, but they have a strong personal brand, even though they're seeking a salary position, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go with this person who's really established themselves as an expert. So I've heard exactly what you said. People say, I'm not a brand. Just like you said, first reason is that you are limiting yourself by not taking advantage of putting that power back into your hands, the creator of whatever you want to see. And then number two, people are going to create your brand, especially online, for you anyway. So it's best to protect your reputation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And that can be as simple as how you craft the headline on your LinkedIn profile. You know, everybody is an entrepreneur at some level. Even if you're working for a corporation, you've still chosen to sell them your time or your services or your skills. You still have that business of you. And when you're applying for jobs with HR, which is getting hundreds or thousands of applications, if you don't have a clear statement of who you are and what you represent, even if that is simply, I'm a developer with so many years experience and this is what makes me unique, then they're not going to remember you. You're going to be lost in the shuffle unless you can give them a clear definition so they can say that, oh yeah, I remember that app from that person who was such and such. You want to help stand out in that way.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better. I think I didn't even think about that. You know, it's true. You are selling you. You are literally selling you. And so, I don't know. To me, it's not negotiable. And it's crazy because if you would have talked to me a decade ago, I would have been like, I'm not a brand. I think it sounds narcissistic. It sounds ridiculous. I'm a writer. I'm not a brand. Fast forward to, you know, accomplishing more and learning more and having more experience. Yes, I absolutely am. And you are too. And use that to leverage whatever success you want to see.
Absolutely. So what do you think is the biggest mistake that you see small business owners making?
Complicating things. And what I mean by that, I think that people make things a lot more complicated than what they need to be. I am really big on organization and really living a clean, crisp, organized life in every facet of my life, and that is including business. I think that if you do the work up front to gather all the tools and resources that are available to you and build a really solid foundation, a really organized foundation, use some time to kind of get a hold of the nuts and bolts and work out the kinks of what you're trying to build, I think that life would be a lot better. I feel like if you do an effective job of being organized and laying a firm foundation up front, that your business can almost run itself, or at the very least, it'll have a firm foundation. So all you have to do is show up and manage it to get to your next level. So, you know, to answer your question, I think people just make it harder than what it is. Do your research. Look for the tools that will help you run your business and accomplish your goals. And it sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how many people just don't know of certain tools and resources that are available to them. Many of them free. You know, make it simple. That would be my biggest advice. Don't make it harder than what it has to be.
Well, fantastic. So, Kira, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Absolutely. Well, I try to be everywhere, so it's easiest to. So I'll run down the list. You can catch me on Facebook and connect with me there. I believe it's www.facebook.com/The Real Kira Ming. And on Twitter, I am The Real Kira Ming, and Instagram, The Real Kira Ming as well. You can look for my Perk 360 column. So I'll provide links if you need them, but pretty much you can just search online Perk 360 and Kira Ming, and that is my marketing and branding column. Huffington Post, Kira Ming. If you search that, you'll also find some of my past articles as well. And any of my platforms on social media, I'm always connecting and looking to, you know, meet with like-minded individuals. And also my book, Small Business, Big Success, is available on Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. So very easy to grab your copy of that as well.
And we'll also have all of those links available over at 2minutetalktips.com/therealKira Ming. So Kira, thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much, Bill. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it.
A lot of times, speaking is about being bigger, broader gestures, a more strongly projected voice, etc. But it's also about being bigger than your limits and being a bigger person than your fears. It's about embracing that opportunity to grow bigger. We also talked in this episode a bit about introverts. You see, many folks feel that they can't speak or they can't do public speaking because they are introverts, or they feel that that is really going to hold them back. But you see, here's the thing. Introversion or extroversion does not matter from the stage. Public speaking is about connecting with your audience and influencing them. The experience, though, is worlds away from the experience of chatting with random folks at a cocktail reception or a networking event, or introducing yourself to strangers, or trying to be the life of the party. Speaking is tiring, but not in the same way that introverts may get tired of dealing directly with groups. And in fact, sometimes being an introvert can have its own perks for speaking, because what's the one thing I come back to again and again about public speaking? It's about practice. It's about rehearsal. It's about the discipline to do the prep work. And that is something that introverts can be very skilled at. But again, once you're on stage, once you're speaking, once you're sharing your message and your story, it's not like going up to a group of people. It's not like seeing that group of 2 or 3 strangers huddled together, having a drink at a reception, and you get uncomfortable trying to figure out, now, how do I get into that conversation? And do I want to get into that conversation? And oh no, why can't I just go home and go to bed? It's a very different experience, and introverts can be very powerful speakers. So, to learn more about Kira and her book, Small Business, Big Success, a straight-to-the-point guide for small business owners, head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/therealKira Ming. Who else do you know that might enjoy this episode? Go ahead and give them the link, 2minutetalktips.com/therealKira Ming. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Two Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.